Hi, everyone. Once again, thanks again for joining us tonight. For those of you who just joined, welcome. During this interactive speaker panel tonight, we'll cover an important topic of how to break into UX. We have some awesome folks who have successfully accomplished that and made this transition pretty recently, who will share the insights from their journeys with you guys and answer questions. Right, so for those of you just joining us for the first time, my name is Michael and I'm the founder of a company called BeginX, a UX career accelerator based on real mission-driven client projects that helps people who know UX basics transition into the field in one of the most efficient and affordable ways and without quitting their jobs. And I don't mean this to brag or anything like that, but just wanted to give you a little bit of a background. For ability purposes, we have run many cohorts and helped over 120 people or so get hired into UX roles. Okay, and here are some actual companies that they were hired by. So essentially, you want to UX this whole career transition journey and think from the standpoint of an employer. Okay, so that's just the key point here. You want to become a candidate who employers look at and think, this is definitely someone who can solve their specific problems and hit the ground running and bring value to our company right away, right? And they need validation, proof that you can actually do that, which they can look for when recruiting and evaluating your application, right? So here's a quick overview of the key competencies that you actually need to gain, and we'll explore all these different areas in a little bit more detail in the following slides, okay? So as you can see here, hard skills is one of them. Softer skills, real experience is like less formal requirement, but it's often necessary and it's one of the most important criteria for employers. And on the right side, you can see portfolio that shows the case studies, skills and experience, resume, and online presence that actually tells you story, UX interviewing and storytelling mastery, and mastery of effective UX job search strategies. Okay, so how do we actually come up with this stuff, right? Well, definitely not out of thin air. Here is what we did. So we interviewed and analyzed hundreds of candidates, identified who had the most success in getting hired faster and why. Interviewed 30, probably by now actually about 60 employers, hiring managers to understand what they're looking for. Analyzed job postings to identify typical employer requirements. Ran over 50 events with both candidates as well as employers and interviewed them and gained insights on what works best, right? So essentially we used the UX process and did a ton of research to identify the key roadblocks that people experience in this career transition journey and gain insight on what is needed in order to design a better way to solve these problems, right? And make this transition effectively, right? Then we synthesized all of that research and identified the common themes, right? Again, one of the key takeaways is to start with the end in mind and clearly understand like what do you need to achieve to be really attractive to employers. So you can actually get hired and not just learn a lot of stuff and then get stuck. So understand how exactly you can become that highly hireable candidate that employers want. So you know where you need to be, right? Now let's explore a simple framework for how you can actually get there. Here is a high-level overview. First, you learn the essentials and foundations of UX, right? So the key principles and concepts, the UX process, main methods, deliverables, tools, etc., right? So typically, this is the most straightforward phase. Next, we call this major phase practice and grow. So this is probably the longest and practical phase where most of your real learning, skill, and experience building will actually take place, right? So this phase is mostly about applying, practicing, learning things in more depth in the process, advancing your skills, and building real experience. The next phase is about creating all the search assets, as we call them. This essentially involves packaging and presenting all of the skills and experience in an effective portfolio, resume, and online presence, right? So key phase necessary to position yourself as an attractive candidate for your job search. So hopefully you can see the slide a little bit better now. So change the layout. The final phase is search prep and execution, which involves learning and mastering effective search strategies, the UX interviewing process prior to kicking off your search. We found that a lot of people really like this product or service analogy, right? So the first two phases are actually quite similar to building a product, and we call them learn and build stage. The last two phases are very similar to marketing and sales, of that product. So that is how we refer to this stage. Essentially, the first big mistake people make is they do not build a great product that is attractive to employers, which means you do not develop your skills sufficiently, or you do not have any experience. And if the product is not great, it will be very hard, if not impossible, to market and sell it, even if you're a master marketer. The other big mistake people actually make is after building an amazing product, they do not devote much effort to really understand what marketing and sales is all about, right? So they basically thinking that just having the skills and experience is not enough, and then it is just a matter of applying to tons of jobs, right? So meaning they do not really understand any of the science behind the marketing and sales, which means they do not put enough effort in order to position themselves as an attractive candidate, and do not learn what effective search strategies are and how to actually navigate that hiring process successfully. And if you do not do that, you can also get stuck looking for jobs for a very, very, very long time if you get there at all. So on this slide, you can basically just see how all the key competencies that you need to gain map nicely to this transition journey, right? So you see when you can attain which competences specifically, right? Again, very simple, but like very handy to refer to and can understand what you're lacking. This is essentially a high-level view of what you need to have to be a highly hireable candidate and when you can attain that. So just to quickly summarize that, and then we jump into the panel. Start with the end in mind. Understand where exactly you need to get to be that highly hireable candidate by potential employers, and then how you'll get there. Ensure that you have a solid product before selling. Otherwise, you can waste months or even years and get stuck, basically. Once you have that solid product, it is key to learn, practice, and apply the principles and best practices behind marketing and selling in order to get hired faster. Do not confuse what phase you're in, right? So understand where you are and what may be blocking you from making progress, and focus on what is most important at that specific moment, right? So do not spread yourself too thin, too much at one time, as that will yield very little progress. Awesome. So now to the most fun part, actually interviewing the folks who have successfully made this UX career transition. Overall, we'll discuss the main phases of the UX career transition journey that we just covered, right? Learn the basics, practicing growing, creating assets, searching, and interviewing, right? So pretty much the whole path. So I'd love to kick that off. I'd love to first kick things off with our wonderful, awesome speakers introducing themselves. So why don't you guys give like a quick 30-second summary about your background?
I can go first. So my name is Meredith, and I started out originally as a textile conservator. So mostly museum-based work, kind of like a mixture of organic chemistry and art history. So on the surface, very different from UX. So, but then I wanted to transition into UX, and so I first started doing customer experience, and then got more involved in the boot camp and did a lot of like self-learning as well. And yeah, was then able to land a UX job.
Thanks, Meredith.
I can go next. So, hello, my name is Simran Wong, and I'm currently a full-time UX designer for the Government of Canada. My current project is with Transport Canada, the Marine Safety Branch. So my university degree was in biomedical sciences, totally irrelevant to UX, and I did a ton of different jobs prior to finding UX. I was like working in the lab, working in the medical clinic. I taught technology to seniors. I taught children. I hosted paint night. Like, it was crazy. And then when I discovered UX, I just completely fell in love. Because in my free time, I actually loved design like logos for my friend and for dentist stuff. I love making browser games with my friends or my programmer friends, and I loved analyzing like technology interfaces with them. So that happens to be like all UX. So I was super committed to being a UX designer, and I tried really hard to learn by myself for a few months. But then I realized, like, to get a job, you needed like a portfolio and real experience. So I obviously didn't have any confidence in myself because I learned it all myself. I was too shy to like find an internship, so I decided to just like go back to school or look into a UX program. Because I already had a 4-year degree, I didn't want to waste another 4 years going back to school. So I looked really hard on the internet and I found Beginnix. And I think Beginnix is great. I actually started my job right after I finished the Beginnix program using my partner project from Beginnix as my portfolio piece. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Simran.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ari, short for Erica. I'm a UX researcher with American Express, and I also, didn't come from a background in UX or design. I actually used to be, I've had a lot of different jobs, but I used to be an actor and simultaneously ended up doing kind of freelance contract roles with a lot of tech companies, which kind of grew my interest in tech. And when I discovered UX, I realized it would be a really good place to pursue my interest in in studying people and in tech at the same time. So that's how I got where I am.
Thanks, Ari. Awesome. So why don't we kick off? We'll take a step back and the first question will be basically, how do you know if you should actually become a UX designer? What are your thoughts on that?
I think at your core, you have to be excited about helping all kinds of people and being willing to be an advocate for them, because there's so many different, things happening on a specific project. You have stakeholders who want a certain thing, or, you have a creative team who wants a certain thing. But at the end of the day, you need to be excited to advocate for that user. Yeah, I think that's something that's important.
Yeah, kind of bouncing off what Meredith said, I think, if you are kind of like me, where you're interested in both creative and analytical sides of jobs, and you don't know what to choose, I think UX is a really good field to go into, because at any point in your career, you can pivot and you have so many different options for industries and types of roles that you want at any given point in your life.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with what Erica and Meredith said. I would also add that if you are someone who really likes technology, and you often catch yourself thinking, why did they do this? Why can't they just do this? It would be so much better. Hey, friend, do you think this is better? And you start asking opinions. I feel like if you do that a lot, you might really enjoy UX. And of course, if you're a designer, a visual designer, you might also enjoy the visual design aspect of UX as well. I think being multidisciplinary is really useful when you come into UX, because you, as Erica said, you can take all those skills and easily pivot into any direction you want. If you just want to be a researcher, a UX researcher specifically, or you want to be someone who does more prototyping, it's totally up to you.
Thank you, guys. What do you think about hard skills? If we start with just hard skills overall, what do you think? What specific hard skills are most important that are really needed to actually get a UX job?
So I would say for sure being good with Figma, because I think that's currently one of the industry standards for making wireframes right now, and it's super powerful. You can make the really fast prototypes to show people proof of concepts in less than 30 minutes. So I would highly recommend just being really proficient at Figma, and then some whiteboarding tool either Miro or Whimsical. I prefer Whimsical, but Miro is really popular, so feel free to do whatever. So I think hard skills are tools like that can show ideas faster. So whatever you use, if you can show ideas really fast, that's one of your hard skills that I think is really valuable to have. So pencil, paper, that's fine. The hard skill would just be showing ideas really fast.
I also think just going into interviews, being aware of a lot of different methods of doing UX, especially doing UX research, whether you want to focus on research or whether you want to do design, it's really important to show a vast knowledge of things, even if you haven't necessarily done them. So, be able to show people what you know by being able to use the right terminology as a UX person.
I agree with both of those. I think too, like basic UI skills is also really important. Just like to Sharon's point, as you're wireframing and trying to show proof of concept, also just kind of having a sense of, like, from a UI standpoint, of kind of where things need to be, I think is also really important.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. What do you think is actually the best way to obtain those skills?
Okay, I'll just jump in real quick because my friends in Beginnix, because you work in little groups, so people on my team all actually commented how fast I was at Figma. And I think that I was able to obtain those skills because when I was self-learning, I basically gave myself a dream app I wanted to make and then tried to make it in Figma. And because it was like a dream app, right, and it was personal, I wanted it to have all these cool animations and features. So I spent a lot of time learning like how you can do this animation, how you can do this, all the features of Figma. And that was how I became super proficient at it. And it was just making your own concept that you really care about. So that's how I got proficient in Figma, but that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, just like spending time doing it, just like putting the hours into those, like into the prototyping tools, or spending the hours like doing research on all of these different skills and different things. Just the time. There's some time that goes into it and some practice, I think.
Yeah, kind of what both of you said. I think it just takes practicing, but also I think not sweating necessarily about like knowing every single possible tool as a beginner UX designer looking for a job, because there are so many tools that you might not even hear about in a program, or even by doing a Google search or something like that for tools. And a lot of companies really just want you to be somebody that will figure it out without a ton of instruction if they're giving you, a new tool that you've never used. So I think although I think, knowing things like Figma and Sketch can give you a good baseline, just being someone that can show that you are just willing to jump into any new program without much instruction, and you're good with that, is most important.
A lot of programs are very similar. For example, Miro and Figma, they're both whiteboarding things. So, and when it comes to like project management apps like Asana, Jira, Kanban, etc., Trello, like once you know one, you kind of know the rest. So it's pretty good to like check one out, and then you can basically say you know all of them.
Thank you, Simran. So how critical are, in your opinion, UI graphic design skills for those, especially for those who like maybe really just want to work in research or information architecture? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a researcher. I mean, for me, I wanted to learn UI skills at first because when I first started doing UX, I thought maybe I would want to be a designer. But as I started doing it more, I realized that research was more where my passion was. That might change down the line, which is why I'm glad that I have the skills. But if you already know, I feel like I don't necessarily want to do design. I have the skills to go into research. I think what you need is just to be able to know how designers are thinking and how they're doing their job and what their job entails, enough to be able to really communicate with them, because you will be working with them one-on-one throughout every step of the process, regardless of if you're actually designing or not when you are on the job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a really great point, and I think for myself, I'm strictly just UX design, and I work in an agency, so we have like a separate research team and then a creative team and graphic team who then we sort of hand things off to, and being able to communicate with them and kind of speak that same language from like a UI standpoint and graphic standpoint is really important, just to sort of help talk through ideas together. So I think, yeah, it's not the most important, but just having some basic understanding, I think, is really great.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I mean, it just depends on, how you want your career to go. Like Meredith is saying she works as a UX designer, but actually a lot of the people doing the more intricate UI kind of graphics work are technically on like a graphics team, but at another company that might be the same person as the UX designer. So it's really, doing research on the types of roles you want, the company you want to look, the types of companies that you want to work for, and then deciding how, in depth you want to go with your UI skills.
For sure. For my job, the UX team is actually really small. So we do the UX and the UI and the research, but that's just because they didn't understand the value of UX until relatively recently. And by recently, I mean the past like 5 years, because the government sees things only in like 5-year chunks. But that's why our UX everything is really new compared to like technology, for example, or the tech industry, I mean. So on my team, all the UX designers do everything. But luckily, if you don't really like doing UI, someone else on the team might prefer to do the UI a little more. It's like completely up to us how we schedule the research sessions, how we hand off the work to each other. So it really, as everyone said, it totally depends on your company. UX is defined as so many different things everywhere. So that's why it's really good to know a little bit of everything, so that, as Erica said earlier, if they want you to do this, you can just jump right in. But it's as important as you make it.
Thank you, Simran. What about coding skills? Do you have any coding skills? How important is it to have coding skills? Have you been asked about that? Have you used that?
I personally don't have any coding skills. And to be honest, it hasn't been something that's come up in my career so far. I think as you work with developers, you sort of pick up a little bit here and there, just to that it just sort of comes with the job. But in the sense of like, am I like sitting doing any sort of coding in my day-to-day? No, I haven't, but I can definitely see the value. And I think I've met some UXers who do, and that they like feel that it's incredibly helpful. But for me personally, it's not something that I use regularly at all, actually.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's kind of a point of contention for a lot of people in UX, because I think some UX designers who don't want to learn coding are like, UX people should never learn coding. Here's why. And I think in some ways it's kind of to prevent that from creeping into this space and becoming responsible for too many things. But I also do think, if you have a genuine interest in coding, you should learn that based off that interest. And there are probably jobs out there, especially in maybe smaller companies and even some bigger companies, that you could combine those skills. But it's definitely not necessary to find a UX job to do coding.
Mm-hmm. I actually do know a little bit of coding, but it's not like website coding. It's like game coding, which is not useful to anyone. But of course, I never advertised that on my resume or anything. So my job didn't require coding at all. I don't do coding in my job at all. But I will admit, recently there was some one of the other UX designer also doesn't know any coding, my coworker. And there was something where my knowledge of coding did actually help contribute to solving a problem. So that's like a nice thing to have, but totally not necessary to get the job or to keep the job. Like we could have just asked the dev and it would have been fine too.
When I was first starting out my job search and I was still looking at UX like design jobs, there were a couple of UI jobs that I was looked over for because I didn't have web development or coding skills of like HTML and CSS, but I think that's more of the rarity and not the rule. So yeah.
Oh, sorry. I do want to mention the HTML and CSS thing. I do think that's nice, really nice to learn. I actually do have. I think I might have that on my resume, but I do recommend you checking it out because the issue that I helped solve was an HTML CSS issue, which is a very simple thing to resolve. So I do think it's worth looking at, but I don't really need that for my current position.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's what we kind of got from doing lots of research as well, is that probably shouldn't be the first thing you learn, right? But once you have solid UX, hard UX skills and softer skills, which we'll talk about in a second, then maybe pick up some coding, which could potentially be useful, especially not so much for doing all the coding yourself, but just for interacting with developers, with the programmers, right? So this way you'll get a little bit more respect, you'll be able to communicate better with them, etc. And I want to take a couple of quick questions from the comments section that we have here, and then we'll jump back into our discussion, right? And it looks like, so Spencer, thanks for asking the question. I think we just addressed what you asked, right, about understanding software web development. So what else? Julia asks, will this be recorded? Julia, yes, this will be recorded. We'll most likely publish it as long as everything comes out well. And there's a quick question for Erica. Erica, could you explain your typical day? What's your typical day like as a UX researcher? And while you're thinking about that, Trista has a question. And Trista, we'll come back to your question in a little bit when we're actually covering portfolio and asset building, right? And then we'll address that. Okay, Erica.
Yeah, so my days aren't always actually super typical, which I like because so I lead the US Rapid Labs program, and basically they're rapid usability labs where we'll have a couple of days of usability testing sessions every couple of weeks, and obviously there's prep work in between, but it's really cool because I get to work with a lot of different teams, so I get to learn about a lot of different products that we're working on, from mobile products to web products to banking products to credit card products. And basically most of what I do is talk to designers and talk to teams and find out what they want to know and then create plans to get there. I don't actually moderate the usability sessions, but I work with a third-party vendor directly who has the moderator who's moderating the sessions. And then in the middle of that, I might also do things like run my own studies on usertesting.com or Qualtrics if it's a survey or something like that. So it really just varies day to day, which I think is exciting. And I think, at least in my job as a researcher, there's a lot of flexibility in me kind of deciding how I want to spend my time and what I'm interested in pursuing research-wise.
Thanks, Eric. So Anita, hopefully that clarifies it a little bit. Yeah, again, for those who joined recently, feel free to put your questions in the comment section, and we'll address those as we go. We'll pause a couple more times and formal Q&A. And we still have a lot to cover because we want to make sure this is as insightful as possible and kind of covers the whole transition, so you actually leave with some tangible insights from this event. Okay, so what softer skills are most important in your opinion, and why?
So I would say the most important soft skill is being able to take criticism. I think that's the difference between like a person who's like fine at a UX design and someone who's like really good at UX design. Being able to take criticism, not be offended, thank them, and then like incorporate it. I think that's the best way to get good designs. It's just to iterate as much as possible based on feedback. So being open to criticism.
Thank you, Sinra.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I also wanted to say, kind of being someone who's willing to sort of leave your ego behind, like not necessarily being married to your ideas, being really flexible. And additionally, I think just having people skills and being able to communicate with a lot of different types of people and know the best ways to communicate with people is another soft skill that is really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what y'all said. I think like that ability to be flexible is so important, especially like if the research shows that you actually have to go a little bit in a different direction after you've done usability testing, being able to kind of make that pivot, I think is really important. And also just having empathy and like listening more than telling sometimes I think is a really, really important skill for sure.
Thanks, Meredith. What do you guys think? Like, what is the best way to actually obtain those skills? And I also want to add that some of the classic ones like empathy, presentation, ability to work with the client, with stakeholders, teamwork is crucial, right? What do you think, guys? How to actually build those skills?
I mean, my first response to how to build skills like that, I think, is being reflective on experiences you've had, because I know, like, it doesn't matter what you've done, you have had experiences that you could build those skills that you need, those soft skills like empathy and listening and working with different types of people. And I think a lot of building that is reflecting on the experiences that you've had and being able to realize what ways you need to grow and what you need to keep practicing in your interactions with people. And then also realizing where your strengths are so you can talk about them in your interviews based off of those experiences.
For sure. Like I was going to say practice, but it's really hard to practice without being mindful. So basically what Erica said is being reflective. So that's probably the most important way, is just to be reflective, think about your feelings. But one way that could help is make something that you actually care about and then get feedback and then see how you feel. Because when I was making that dream app of mine, the criticism was a lot from my friends. So it was a really good way to practice taking feedback. And I didn't even realize it until I was like, going through a UX process, compiling my research and realizing, oh, wait, actually like 8 people said this thing that I was like dismissing in my head every time they said it. But now I'm looking at it and I'm like, no, they were all right. I need to check my ego away. And then after practicing that a bunch of times, now I feel like I'm a lot better. So you still have to be reflective. There's no easy way about it, but practicing it a lot helps you, remember.
Meredith, I think you started saying something,
totally
right?
Agree. No, I wish there was like a snaps thing I could give on this, or like the little clap reaction. Because I totally agree with both of you. I think you all said it beautifully.
Okay, cool. How can actually no, before we jump into work experience, do you recommend any quick specific resources for obtaining hard skills or software skills, like maybe some of the ones you mentioned, or something like presentation or communication, etc.? Any specific resources or sites or anything that you would like to maybe recommend quickly?
I'll jump in really quick. I really love Baymard Institute. They specialize in e-commerce, but they basically have a lot of different benchmarks, like UX benchmarks, and then they look at a lot of different e-commerce sites and rate them against those different benchmarks and do kind of write-ups about those case studies. So it's a really good way to just, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty on like navigation menus or product landing pages and learn about best UX practices, I think it's a really fun tool and really helpful as well.
Awesome.
There are just so many resources. I don't even know where to begin, so I'll let Erica go ahead.
Pick your top three.
Like, I know there's a site I was using that had like someone had made the onboarding process for like over 24 apps. So if you were looking to implement an onboarding process for your app, that was an amazing resource. I would look through like at least 20 of them, being like, wow, so many different onboarding techniques. But yeah, there's just so many UX resources. I would have to pull out my list. So Erica, you can go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, there are so many resources. I think one that, I mean, honestly, there are some really cool, if you're into UI, like pages on Instagram with different UI designs. And I think, I don't know, maybe this is part of building up soft skills too, but one thing that if I think is really interesting and helpful is sometimes when things look really cool, they're not always the best as far as usability is concerned or accessibility. So if you want to kind of exercise your usability mind, you can kind of pick apart those really cool designs and be like, oh, well, this looks amazing, but it doesn't make sense for this. So, I mean, I think any of those resources where you're looking at high level work and able to, at the same time, use your own mind and kind of pick it apart is good resources. I think Googling anything you want to learn. I think LinkedIn definitely, obviously, is another really good resource, especially if you want to, network and meet other designers. So, yeah.
Thanks, Erin. Simran, did you pick your top three?
Okay. So I looked at the chat a little bit and it gave me some inspiration. Someone just asked, what can help you with UI skills? So there is a site called like Daily UI, or it's called 100 Days of UI, but I think it's called Daily UI. And every day they just send you like a new challenge to design UI wise, I think. And that's really nice if you want to practice your UI, because it will say something like make a search or make a shop or something, an onboarding page for this. So now you have to like kind of do research to see what everyone else is doing, or just pull it from your head, but then look at what everyone else is doing too, and kind of compare and think about it. And that can actually really improve your UX skills too, because then you know what other people are doing, what the industry standard is, and you can look at what your design's lacking or how much better your design is than everyone else's. And I think that's a really good way to kind of practice that. But that's kind of something that I was doing back when I was like self-learning, because it's super general. In my current job, I'm just like practicing stuff I need for my current job, which is not just like random shops and onboarding. It's like specifically an app I'm working on. So the practice is totally different, I think, when you're self-learning versus when you're in the job and you're just trying to keep your skills sharp. I don't know if that's super helpful, but the thing I recommend was Daily UI. So.
Thank you, Simran. What do you guys think in terms of work experience, right? So how can you actually, we're kind of moving on, if you remember that diagram that I showed in the beginning, the journey, we're moving from kind of learning basics to practicing, growing, obtaining those different types of skills that are important. So moving on to work experience, how can you actually build that work experience when most employers are already looking for candidates with 1 or 2 years of that experience, even for entry-level jobs?
Okay, so for me, I'll just say I didn't have any experience, which is why I looked for a program to give me experience. And BeginX's program basically gives you 2 case studies right away. So that's why I signed up for this, because I was like, okay, all I need is experience, and then I could probably just get a job. And then that did happen, which is awesome. So, but BeginX gives you 2, and the first one is like a mentor. You're like led through with everyone. There's a lot of hand holding, which is amazing, because turns out I didn't know anything. And then I learned so much. And then for the second partner project, you're on your own. Of course, you can ask for help if you need to. But you can also just do it with your friends and your coworkers. I forgot what they're called. Your teammates. Sorry. And I learned so much from that I actually only used that one project when I applied for my current job, because it was just so meaty. Like, I had so much stuff, because it was actually an end-to-end app development. So when I presented that, they asked me a bunch of questions, and then they did ask questions about like random things about other experiences I've had. My mind just went to my first BeginX project, and I answered questions about my past project. And I just never offered up the idea that I had only done 2 projects ever in my life. And they don't ask you, like, did you ever only do 2 in your life, right? They don't ask that. So you don't need to offer that you're a junior UX designer, you've only ever done 2 projects, you're new, you're sorry that you're here. Like, that's something that BeginX actually taught me, which is like, don't undersell yourself. You are a professional now. Like, it really helped me get over imposter syndrome. I actually got a ton of confidence. So that's why I was able to like get into that interview and just act like I was a real UX designer, because I was. So that's my answer for this question.
Thank you, Simran.
I think I have a similar answer. I mean, I think one of the main things is like, if you worked on, even if you're just like doing volunteer projects and stuff, you don't have to like, it's still a job. It's a job, whether it was 5 hours a week or 40 hours a week. And you can still talk about different skills and experiences you've had based off of those jobs. And you don't have to specify like, oh, this is how much time per week that job is, and nobody was going to ask you. So I think, it's about not underselling yourself as a professional. And also, I think one thing that was helpful for me is even just like thinking about previous work experiences I've had, I like wrote down and like mapped out every single way that it could align with UX design and UX skills and UX research, so that I was just like, yeah, I've been designing for a year. Here is my portfolio of projects. They didn't know that they were I talked about it like they were jobs, which to me they were, because I was spending a significant amount of time on them and they were real projects. And also just being like, and not only this, yeah, I've been doing this for a year, but I've been doing this for actually a lot longer because of all of these other experiences that I've had. So UX is cool because so many different disciplines relate to it.
Yeah, I think like to piggyback on that, I think too, in your current job, or like if you're still kind of making that transition into UX, you can sometimes maybe leverage leverage something that you're currently doing. Like in my previous experience, when I was doing customer experience, it was like, okay, like why, we're hearing from customers, like what can I do with that information to then share with my team of like, hey, maybe we could implement X, Y, and Z. It's like kind of take it like this is a user study, and now like these are my results, and I'm going to package this in a way that can then like help my team. And then if all goes well, maybe you then can even share some metrics like, hey, like I did this project at my current job. And even though you're not in maybe a UX specific role, you can do some UX things and then have some metrics at the end, like, oh, we improved growth by, whatever percent, or we saw this improvement, which would be really nice, and just kind of an additional way that you can, leverage kind of your current situation.
Cool. Thank you, guys. How many case studies do you think one needs to actually land a UX job? And while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to quickly take and address Trista's question, since you asked about portfolio pieces and case studies, right? So, Trista, I think to kind of sum it up, so she was asking, when you started looking for a UX job and you only had school pieces on your portfolio, how do you market yourself and validate your project? So to address that, right, it's basically, it sounds like most of these folks did not just have school pieces, right? They actually had real client projects that they did in the program and elsewhere, right? And again, even though all these folks are our alumni, right, and worked on real client projects, we're going to cover like all the questions along this journey, right? And how you could do something similar without a program like that, right? You could do something similar on your own. It's just much harder, right? So it's, so Trista, I hope that clarifies your question. If you guys want to add anything to that. But I think that was...
sorry, I do just want to add, I will admit that I did find a lot of UX intern jobs when I looked it up in the city I was currently living at the time. And like theoretically, I could have applied to them myself. But like honestly, after doing the program, there was just so much I didn't even know I didn't know. Like I mentioned originally, like Beginnix gives you 2 clients to work with. The first client, they kind of hold your hand through it. And oh my God, I needed so much hand holding. Like it was so much stuff. So I personally for myself am glad I did the program. But theoretically, as Michael said, you could get that experience just by getting that UX intern job. I don't know if like all internships are paid, but I know in Ottawa, where I am, which is like in Canada, I think it was paid. So you could do that. But as Ari said before, like whether you do paid work or unpaid work, you don't have to ever like mention that it was unpaid or that was your first and only project. You just say like my past experience or during a past project, my last project, my recent project, and you don't ever have to say that was unpaid. So you can leverage that for sure.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Trista, also to add to that, again, it's key to get some type of real client. It can be through volunteering also. It can just be pro bono work. You can just find a company or find a nonprofit that you like, right? And just keep doing something and keep building yourself up, right? It's definitely, I would personally not recommend to just like sit and wait, right? And just apply if you only have hypothetical projects, right?
Oh,
you
sorry,
can find, yeah.
I just want to mention one thing. A real client is super important, like even if it's free, because it's like really sometimes it's like way harder than you expect. Because when I was originally doing my dream app, I thought it was pretty great and would be great for applying. And it's true, I've never tried applying with it, but now I'm looking back and it's like trash. It's like not good enough to apply to anything with. Like that real client experience, it just had so many like hurdles and problems I had to overcome. And that made for amazing portfolio work, right? Because then you could talk about how like the CEO's vision didn't match with like what the devs could do. You could like talk about so much more. So I highly recommend, as Michael said, get a real client.
Thank you, Sandra. So coming back to case studies, how many do you guys think you need to get a UX job?
I think having like 3 really like fleshed out ones is really nice, especially during the interview process, because then in my experience, I usually spoke to 2 of them, but it was really nice to kind of have that third option, to kind of swap out depending on like what company I was interviewing for or what the job I was interviewing for. Or sometimes they would tell you like, oh, we have this project upcoming. And it would be nice that, like, oh, if one of my case studies kind of aligned a little bit more. So it gave you a little bit of flexibility to like have about like 3 or so, just in my personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the number is, I think definitely 3 is a good number to shoot for. Don't feel like you can't start applying for jobs before you have 3. When I only had 2 on my portfolio, I was still getting interviews. And even I think what's most important is just having something online that's showing your thought process, even and not being too perfectionistic about how your portfolio looks. Like I was still getting design interviews even when I thought that my portfolio looked terrible, because all I had time to do was just like kind of like post screenshots of different random things in like a vague order of what happened. But yeah, I mean, definitely always keep working to improve your portfolio, but don't let that stop you from applying for jobs before you have 3 projects. But that's definitely a good number to shoot for.
3 is, of course, like, I think like maybe the golden standard. 5 is like if you're crazy, but the thing is I only have 2. And when I applied for my current job, I was like being such a perfectionist about my online portfolio. I ended up like not doing an online portfolio. And for my current job, what I did is I just threw everything on slides, like a Google Slides, and just submitted that as my work sample. And I was like, wow, this looks really bad. But okay, it didn't look that bad, but it was definitely like not, like I definitely didn't look like a UI designer, but it's okay because it was for UX designer role, so it's fine. I think a really important thing is that whatever case study you do submit is like really meaty. Like as I mentioned, I had done 2 case studies, but one was like I did like an end-to-end where I was like the researcher, I did the design, and then there was like handoff and all sorts of stuff. So if you have one really meaty project, I think you're good to start applying for jobs if you can speak about this well. It would be great if you had 2, because then when they ask about past experiences, you can actually talk about the second UX thing that you did instead of like leveraging like your administrator role, which I was also an administrator, instead of like leveraging my random past. So it's best to have at least 2 so you can speak about more UX stuff. But having just one really meaty thing, I think you're safe to start to apply to stuff. And even if you don't get it, at least you're getting practice, right? Now you're more comfortable with like the questions they ask, with doing the interview and stuff like that. So don't be shy. Apply.
Thank you, Simran, and everyone. Yeah, it's definitely basically a case study is not all case studies are equal, essentially, right? Because you may have 3 case studies, but like if all of them are from 2-day hackathons, right, it's not going to get you very far, right? Versus maybe you just have 1, but it was from a job you worked on for like a year, right? So that you will be able to get, most likely will be able to get something. So there are exceptions. Typically the magic number is 3, right? As everyone said, to just synthesize that. That's what we got from like doing lots of research as well. But again, we recommend having a couple of them with real clients and then having 3 overall. Maybe one can be hypothetical, totally fine, right? But a couple should be with real clients. This way you're much more marketable than like most folks out there who are just starting out. Okay. So coming back, we touched on this a little bit, but in your opinion, what do you guys think employers look for in UX candidates? How do you position yourself as an attractive candidate to employers? If you were to summarize it and like, yeah, see, Meredith's cat really wants to participate as well.
And then you I think it's really important to position yourself as someone who's user focused but who can also balance like the business needs as well. Because at the end of the day, like, you're still working for a company that's like trying to make money. So like show that you can do both. And then also I think like showing that you're excited about whatever the trends are. Like you want to be at the forefront. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You want to be at the forefront of, UX design trends, and you want to be innovative, because I think technology is changing so fast, and, the things that were, hip last year are maybe like not the newest thing right now. So I think, showing that you're someone who's innovative and like excited to keep learning and is focused on the user when balancing those business goals as well.
Yeah, bouncing off of that, I definitely think showing that you're someone that is able to understand the needs of both design, but then also be able to compromise and negotiate with the business and understand that perspective of things too is really important. I also think just like understanding how teams like within a company work together is also important, and being able to give answers in interviews that are going to be satisfactory. Like, I think, for instance, one question I kept getting asked that I couldn't really answer in some of my interviews was, if I created a design and the like programming side of things was like, that's not feasible, we don't have time for that, what would I do? Well, the answer that I kept giving in those questions was, I would, try to, I would compromise with them and try to come up with a different solution, which, is a fine answer. But I ended up talking to a project manager who told me that the answer that they want to hear, because this is based off of how people would actually be working together, is that you would kind of end up actually looking at the design library of the things that have already been built out, because that is what the programming side of things would be looking at as far as time savers. And then you would see what that has already been built out could be added to be a solution for what you're trying to solve for.
That is a really good point. That actually just came up in a meeting we had. One thing I think you really should keep in mind is that because UX is like pretty new, and a lot of companies don't even know what it is, and some companies think it's just like UI and stuff. You'll find that everyone, all these roles will interview you like maybe a little bit differently. In my case, I actually did have UX people interview me, which was really nice because they were very friendly. They were UX designers, so all they wanted to see were skills. They didn't like try to trick me or do anything awful. They just wanted like a coworker. But if you're trying, there could be companies that you might apply for, and they're just a little bit more cutthroat in that interview. So it really just depends on them. Of course, just try to prepare yourself the best you can. Look at common interview questions beforehand. But to answer Michael's question, which is like, what can you do so that you look attractive to the interviewer, I guess no matter who they are, is show that you have the skills. I wouldn't worry too much about like trick questions, because if they want to be like really rude, like, I don't know, do you want to work when there's like nice cushy places like the government willing to take you? So just show that you have the skills and be confident. That one is just act, just like be confident. As I said before, I had like really big imposter syndrome before I did Beginnix, and I would never have gotten a job. I would have just like apologized for even being in the room, apologized for pretending to be a UX designer. But thankfully I got over it. And when I did go into the interview, I acted like I've been a designer for like 20 years. I didn't say that. I didn't just lie, but like I had the confidence that I belong here and that I should get this job. So you should really work on the confidence too. But you can only get that if you have the skills. So please get the skills first. As Michael said, like you want to be a good product before you sell the product.
Thank you, Simran. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And also for the audience, keep posting those questions. I know we have a couple of questions hanging there, so we'll come back to them in a second. Feel free, if you have questions, again, we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. If you have questions, post those. as long as they're focused on how to break into UX. And our next question that I'd like to address is, what do you guys think are the top 3 things for an effective portfolio, in your opinion? Because we already have kind of started talking about this. The top 3 things for an effective portfolio.
I think like showing some of your personality and who you are somehow in your portfolio, I think is really important. Demonstrating like critical thinking and problem solving is important. And then also showing you can work with a team, because the UX designer typically, like not at every single job, but a lot of the times there's, a lot of opportunity for collaboration. And so I think that that's really important.
So 100% what Meredith said. I just want to add another point to that is just showing that you can communicate with stakeholders, because the UXers, at least in my role, we also sit on the HQ meetings with like upper management, and we have to like sit there, talk about why things are the way they are, and then later go to the devs and the normal people. Sorry, by normal people, I meant the inspectors. I just couldn't think of another word for them, but the inspectors who inspect the boats, and then talk to them about like what HQ said and why we have to do this way. So being able to communicate with like stakeholders and users and be able to consolidate that, just showing that you can is really nice. I think something that they expressed interest in when I was presenting my case study is that during my partner project, there was a tiny bit of a conflict with what the CEO wanted and what the sprint that we were doing could deliver. He wanted like this massive scope thing, and we only had like 10 weeks to make something. So we had to really boil it down to like an MVP. So I was able to leverage this little bit of a conflict and talk about that a lot during my case study presentation. And they were so impressed. I like talked to the CEO, but it was just because it was like a startup. So there was only like 5 people, but it's really cool because I gotta just keep saying that I spoke with the CEO. So yeah, showing that you speak with stakeholders and you can communicate effectively with all levels is my answer to that question.
I think it's, being able to, be a storyteller and, like Meredith was saying, show a little bit of your personality in your portfolio. As much as you can, tell a story and engage someone's empathy with your portfolio and show the way that you specifically think about things is the best way to go about doing that, in my opinion.
So Sharad was asking, how important do you think it is to showcase your design across different communication channels, like designing for an app, a smartwatch, a PC, a tablet, etc., in your portfolio? What do you think?
So I think this really goes back to what Meredith was saying earlier about how when you're applying for different jobs, you kind of want to cater whatever you're showing that hiring manager, you want to cater kind of your portfolio to them a bit. So if you're working for a company that wants you to be working on the app, like it might say during the job description, you want to leverage your app making experience, right? So if you don't have any mobile experience, like at least have some experience with like responsive design, right? Like even if you've only worked on a desktop thing, like what happens when someone's on a smaller desktop or whatever, what happens if someone opens it on mobile? Like you don't have to have ever had experience making a mobile app. You can just leverage like responsive design, right? So it's best if you actually have experience in all the channels, right? But if you don't have experience in all the channels, just try to leverage like what that thing is from something else. For example, a smartwatch. Basically, if you design an app, you can be like, I know how to work with limited space, and I know how to do responsive stuff, right? So as long as you can leverage stuff, you're good.
I mean, the only thing I have to add is, obviously, it's nice if you're applying for, certain type of company to have the device that they that maybe the team you're applying for is working on the most. But if you don't have that, as long as you can talk about some of the differences in design systems and just show a general understanding of best practices for different devices, that's totally fine.
Thanks, Ari.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Spencer asks, how did you find balance in life between maybe working a job that you didn't love and job hunting, networking, etc.? Were you able to find the balance? Was it difficult?
Yeah, for me personally, especially when I was doing Beginx, I had a really awesome small group for the project, and they just made it so much fun. And the work that we were doing, I was just absolutely like loving learning all of the UX things. So it kind of was like, for me, it was like a fun thing to do. And so I was like excited to get home after work and work on it. But also once then we moved into like the portfolio side and the job hunting side, it is a little less exciting than like working with your team. And so for me, I just had to set aside a certain amount of time. Like on the weekend, I would say, okay, I'm going to work on my portfolio for X number of hours this weekend. But then that was it, because just for the type of person that I am, I could sit there for a very long time, like trying to, finagle everything exactly right and exactly how I wanted it. So I kind of had to like set some boundaries a little bit and just say like, okay, this is like how much time I'm going to spend on this week or this weekend. And just knowing that, like, even though it was a lot of time and a lot of work, I was just really excited to move into UX. So that kind of like helped keep me going.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, for me, I had a full-time job that allowed me, or they didn't, it was doing like office management stuff. So I could kind of just like steal a half an hour to do an interview in a conference room or something like that. But if you don't necessarily have that, there's always like your lunch break. And then I think it's being patient with yourself, because I think it's really hard to have a full-time job and conducting a job search that can also feel like a full-time job at the same time. And knowing as long as you are, trying and learning something new or meeting a new person, you're one step closer to being where you want to be. So
Thank you, Ari.
I was just really, really lucky. So I don't know, like, if I can say too much about this, but I was working a full-time job as an administrator for the government, with the secret plan of leaving when I got a UX job. And then I just got a UX job in the government. So I'm still here. So I don't really have much to say about this because I was an admin. I wasn't very busy. So I actually had time to do this UX stuff. So I was really, really lucky.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So it's, essentially it just depends on your job, on your current job, like what you're doing. If it's really, really crazy, if you work like 100 hours a week, obviously it's going to be very hard, right? But if it's a typical 9 to 5, right, or something like that, then it's definitely doable. And actually, UX transition may keep you much more motivated because you feel like you're actually striving to achieve your goal. Kind of what Meredith was saying, right? So you're striving to achieve your goals, right? That will, actually may help you feel less stressed because you're addressing the problem that you have. Cool. So what I also wanted to ask you guys, any resume or LinkedIn tips that you guys want to give the audience? Maybe your top 2 or 1 or 3, up to 3.
I would say, and I think this is, I don't know, this might not be totally new news, but I think you don't have to match all of the requirements. Like there was definitely things where like, just go ahead and apply if you match the majority of them. I think, I just don't sell yourself short, because, and especially if it's like, oh, I don't have this exact thing. But again, like maybe you have some sort of experience that's like a little tangential. I don't think I'm saying that word right. But then you could like apply that somehow to your job search, or like to that interview, and like speak to it. So yeah, I think I wouldn't get totally hung up in the details of those like job requirements.
I also think in a weird way, I mean, the most effective way to look for jobs, which is something that also Beginix kind of drove home for me, is not just like applying to like hundreds of jobs. But when you do find a few jobs where, you met someone in the company and, or, you like networked for it, or maybe a recruiter reached out to you for it or something, taking time to, even if you don't match the job description, look through it and kind of tailor some of your experiences to sound similar is also really helpful.
Oh, I was just going to add one quick thing. Something Ari said made me, I was like, oh yes, also this. When it comes to networking, if you like find a job that you're interested in, and then you can go and see like who works there and what the connections are, and you can be like, oh, my friend is connected, like even though I'm not directly connected with someone there, but like my friend is connected with someone there, like someone who I would feel comfortable reaching out to. Like I feel like people in general are usually pretty happy to like introduce you to their like friend who works at that company, and that friend is usually likely to refer you, because a lot of companies offer referral bonuses. So depending on the company, but sometimes, people are like, yeah, sure. Like, let's chat. Maybe they'll have like a little chat with you, get to know you a little bit, and then they'll refer you. And sometimes that can help just to like get your foot in the door somewhere, versus just like, just applying generally versus like having a referral.
I actually did just remember a tip. So apply internally to your current company, because I imagine if you're already a UX designer, never mind. But if you're currently doing something not UX and you want to transition to UX, it's easier to apply within your own company. So that was definitely the case with the government. But I've actually been to a few of these talks that Michael hosted before as a viewer, and a bunch of other people had also got their first UX jobs in their own company. So right when you're first transitioning in, you just want to get your foot in the door, right? So don't think too hard. If you don't like your company, then I guess you don't have to stay. But if you don't hate your company, try to get your foot in the door as a UX designer, because I do think it's easier to get another job within the same company. Maybe not all the time, but in my case and in a few other people's cases who had spoken before, it was the case. So look inside your internal job postings.
Awesome.
So that's not a LinkedIn tip, but that's just a how to get a job tip, a UX job tip.
That kind of addresses one of our next questions, so that got covered as well. So I want to come back to audience and address a few more questions. So again, to the audience, feel free to share your questions in the comments, and we'll try to address as many as possible. We don't have lots of time, but we'll try to pick up and also clarify who you would like to answer the question, who the question is for. This way we can get through many of them. So Delkash has asked a question everyone keeps asking: did you all reveal every bit of information on your case studies, or does it help to keep a few things away for later in case you get an interview call? And then there is a follow-up by Julia. She said, related to this question, how do you handle discussing the findings from client projects that have not yet been made public? I struggled in deciding how much to reveal despite the work not being confidential. So to just quickly recap, right, did you reveal all the information in the case studies? Did you keep anything out so you can address it and discuss in more detail during the interviews? And then we'll come back to the other one.
I actually found that, for me, I put everything on my case study. And then during interviews, when I was doing portfolio reviews, I would actually only pick out certain parts of the case studies that related most to the job that I was applying for or the company that I was applying for. So it ended up kind of being the opposite of that. But I think so that I had a good broad portfolio that I could use for a lot of different job possibilities, it was really helpful to have as much information as possible in it. And yeah, I know like some people, when they have confidential information, they're able to have agreements where, you know, maybe they'll password protect it and only share it with certain types of companies or people at certain levels within the company as they're going along their job process, but it just kind of depends.
That password protecting thing, you might see a lot, but one thing you can do as well is also use just slideshows, where you just like send, or rather not just slideshows, you could also put it on like a private website or something, like a private Notion document, and send it to only hiring managers and stuff. So that's also another alternative to like the password thing. So that's for the confidential stuff. And in terms of revealing every bit of information, I think that's actually kind of controversial, whether some people prefer short case studies and some people prefer long case studies. I still don't know what the answer is. So that's why I gave up and put everything on a slide, because I was like, this question is like really, I'm spending a lot of time on this question, but I do like the idea Erica has where you just make a really long one for yourself. And then when you go into, whenever you have like interviews and stuff, you can just quickly go through, pull out stuff you need, throw it on your slides or whatever you plan on presenting, and then just like go into your interview with the relevant stuff, right? So that seems like a really efficient way to do it. I don't have a public portfolio, so I can't speak to that in terms of like whether my portfolio is like super long or super short, but maybe Meredith can speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of, I guess, did a mix a little bit of what you're both talking about. Like I have everything on my portfolio online. It is password protected. And then I just have like the passwords available upon request, or on my resume, if I'm like sending it directly, like if I'm applying to a specific job, it'll have the password on there so that it's just like, you know, only going to that hiring manager. But then in an interview, I'll like pull things out similar to like what Ari was saying, like pull things out and put it in a slide. And then I can, one, it's kind of, then it's like, oh, it's a little different, you know, like it's not like exactly like the portfolio. So it's just like changing things up a little bit and tailoring it, which is really nice. And then like you're adding that voiceover as you're walking through, and kind of you can call out specific things that you think would be applicable to the job where you're applying for.
And some people actually have both. So they'll have a page where you may have a short version, and then you can click into the longer version if you're curious or want to know more.
Awesome. Did you guys also have any thoughts, anything you wanted to add on what Julia was asking in terms of confidential stuff? Like if you worked on something that maybe hasn't been published, like did you actually have that happen to you?
I had that on one project. And what I did was I ended up like removing some things from the project, like logos or anything like that. And then when I presented it, I made a slideshow, and then I only shared my screen and walked them through so that then it wasn't like I never was handing it over to anyone. But I would definitely I would not advise sharing any confidential material. Like everything I shared, I like made sure that the way that I was presenting it was okay. So I would just definitely recommend like making sure you dot all your I's and cross your T's. Like you definitely don't want to be sharing things that you're not supposed to be sharing.
Yeah, Ray, Zinran, anything you want to add to that? If you have that type of situation.
I've never had that situation myself, but I remember doing research into it in case I ever had it. And it was just what Meredith said, where you remove logos, maybe even change colors if that's not too much work, but it's probably too much work. So just do what she said, where you kind of hold on to everything. But I've actually never had that myself, so I can't really speak to it.
Okay, awesome. So anyway, and Jenny, to address, I think you added a little bit of clarity to your question, and you mentioned maybe it's an imposter syndrome if you will be like looked at in a worse way because you accepted that bootcamp job, right? So basically, she was concerned that if she accepts a certain role at a certain bootcamp that may not have the best reputation. I think anything is a good starting point, to be honest, Jenny. And if you feel, this is not the best place, potentially I would just continue searching. I mean, it will add to your experience anyway. And I assume you're saying that you're actually hired into some type of UX role in that book, not just like tutoring or whatever, right? So just wanted to clarify that. So we do have to wrap up because we're running, I think it's 1 hour, 33 minutes, because we did want to give you guys as much value as possible. So hope you guys enjoyed the event. Let me also quickly tell you about the program that we're running, since all the alumni have been telling you about it. So this may be a great opportunity for some of you. So basically what BeginX is, it's a part-time UX career accelerator program with real mission-driven clients designed to help people transition into UX without quitting their jobs, right? And so far we've run 14 cohorts, helped over 120 people, probably more than that actually, transition into UX. And alumni of the program have been hired by companies like SiriusXM, Coach, ABC News, Facebook, JP Morgan. I mean, there are like really many. All of the folks on the panel as well. So recently we have also been ranked by, recently, like last year, I would say, by SwitchUp as one of the best UX bootcamps, right? The advisors and mentors are also practitioners from companies like Google, IDEO, American Express, The Economist, many others. Sorry. Who the program is best for? The program is the best fit for people who know UX basics or come from a design, research, creative, tech, or related background and look to transition into UX in one of the most efficient and affordable ways and without quitting their current jobs, right? We're also pretty selective, and look for folks who are motivated and committed team players, right? What do you gain after completing the program is you build not just the hard skills, but the critical softer skills, real experience with a robust portfolio, right? And expand your professional network and get ready to actually land a UX job, right? In fact, our grads, as you have noticed, have done so well that we now offer a money-back guarantee. You'll either land a UX job or you get your tuition back plus an extra $200 on top of that. So if it sounds like you may be a good candidate, you can learn more at beginx.com. We run many different types of events. So we'll keep you updated about our upcoming events and share resources via our newsletter that is usually sent every few weeks or so. Thank you guys so much for joining. And thank you to our wonderful speakers for all the awesome insights that you guys shared. Really appreciate it. It was a huge pleasure to have you here. If anyone has any other questions, we'll hang around for a few more minutes to just maybe address and cover anything else really quickly. Okay, Claire has a quick question. And by the way, I love all the networking taking place in the comments here. So I love that. It's great. Yeah, keep connecting and reaching out. A question, if there is time, given how long you've been learning, working, how deep do you feel in terms of workable knowledge? How much do you feel like you have to learn to feel like an expert? Maybe in terms of new projects, time working. I also appreciate how learning curves and imposter syndrome can absolutely affect this. Do you guys already feel like you're experts?
It depends who I'm talking to, right? Like if it's a hiring manager, yes. But if I'm just talking to like you guys, my friends, no, I'm obviously like far from an expert.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sarah.
I would feel similarly. I feel like in the sense that there's still a lot to learn, but I definitely feel like very confident in like my current job and what I'm doing, but I think the nature of, like I said before, I'm at an agency, so we're getting a lot of different projects and different clients all the time. So it's really nice to be working on different things. So I do feel like I'm always learning, and there's always that opportunity to learn more, which is really great. So it helps like keep me on my toes and keep me like excited about UX. So
Thank you.
Yeah,
Meredith.
definitely. I don't feel like an expert, but I think part of what helps, I think that like, I mean, obviously there have been people that have been doing this for so long, but there's always something to learn, and anybody can learn from anybody at pretty much any level, which is why I think a lot of companies are hiring people from so many different backgrounds, and not just like a graphic design or a related field, because so many different perspectives are what helps make products great. And yeah, I think being a self-starter and always wanting to learn is just a good attitude to have, no matter what point you're at in your career.
Thanks, Ari.
Oh, sorry. I just want to add, like, that thing Ari just touched on is super important. Being a self-starter, like, you actually have to have a lot of initiative. Of course, every UX role is like a little bit different, but for example, the one I'm currently in and during my partner projects, one thing I noticed is like no one tells you what to do. You're like in control of like what you decide to do, if and when you're going to do research, what you're going to show. Like if you don't show any deliverables, sometimes they might like ask you nicely, but like you're totally in charge of everything. So you should be a self-starter and try to seek out what value you can provide, like deliverables and journey maps and all sorts of stuff like that, and then learn it.
Yeah, I think that's a funny thing that can be kind of like jarring for some people transitioning into UX, is the fact that basically like you don't have really, in a lot of jobs, you don't really have necessarily a guide. You have people you can ask questions of, but it's really up to you to decide what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you might be assigned projects, but a lot of times it's like, oh, how are you gonna go about this project? And you'll probably have meetings to go to at certain times, but other than that, it's really up to you.
Thanks, Ari. Yeah, I want to make sure we'll let you guys go because I know it's getting pretty late. And I see like a lot of folks here saying thanks. So Spencer, thanks so much, everyone. Kristen, Beginner Troll, thank you, Kristen. Sharad. So thank you guys for joining. And yeah, it really was great having you here. So to our speakers, again, this is really insightful. Really appreciate you guys sharing all that you have learned through this. Not an easy transition, but really appreciate all the insights.
yeah, thanks for having us. It was fun.
Yeah,
Happy to
thank
see
you
you
so
again.
much.
Thank you, guys.
And thanks everyone for all the good questions.
All right, see you in the next event. Cheers.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye, Michael.
Bye.
Bye, Mary. Bye, Ari.
See you.